My name is Rosalio Mendez. I am 52 years old, and a few hours ago I returned alone to this rented room in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It is June, but it is so cold that it bites your skin and makes you wonder if you are awake or if it is all just a bad dream. I am sitting on the edge of the bed, barefoot, my socks damp from the rain that caught me on my way back, staring at my college diploma, which I can barely make out under the dim yellow light of the lamp. Outside, I can barely hear the sounds of traffic, a distant train, the siren of an ambulance cutting through the night. The room smells of cold coffee, dampness, and the remains of the chicken stew I reheated a while ago and didn't want to eat. The truth is, I can't help thinking that this place has never been my home. Not this bed with its worn-out springs, not the frayed curtains, not even Milwaukee. And yet, this is where, after so many years and sacrifices, I have to face what I feared most. The moment when you realize that you've lost more than just the country where you were born. Next to the diploma, I leave an invitation, that stiff, elegant card with gold lettering, where my son's name, Leonardo Mendez Castillo, shines. Graduation ceremony, Stanford University. I've read it 1,000 times since I received it, like someone reading the recipe for an impossible dream. But I never stopped to ask myself if I fit into that dream. The envelope came with a short, almost formal letter. Dad, if you can come, here's all the information. Let me know if you decide to come. Not even a, I miss you or I'd love to see you. Just instructions. I understood it as best I could. Today, after so many years of working quietly and sending every penny, I finally felt that I had done enough. That I could allow myself to show up, hug my son at the ceremony, and tell him proudly that it was all worth it. That's why I traveled 18 hours by bus, from Wisconsin to California, my feet swollen, my back in pieces, just to see him receive his diploma. I didn't tell him. I wanted to see him genuinely surprised. I wanted to feel like a real dad. I don't know if it was naivety or cowardice, but amid the applause, amid the crowd of happy families taking pictures, it only took a moment to understand everything. Leonardo was there, impeccable in his black gown, surrounded by elegant young people, and I was there among the crowd, waving at him. When our eyes finally met, I saw something in his gaze that I couldn't identify at first. Sadness? Fear? Shame? He approached, but not too close. His friends asked him something. He shook his head with an awkward smile, one that is so unfamiliar to me. And after a brief hesitation, he walked in the opposite direction. He didn't say hello. He didn't say my name. It was as if I, his father, was just a stranger at his victory party. Here I am now, alone, feeling the weight of so many years. The cold pierces the walls of the room, and I think about my life, about everything I did, about every sleepless night spent trying to scrape together money. And I can't help but wonder, when did I lose my son? When did we stop speaking the same language, dreaming the same dream? The mattress creaks under my weight. I put my feet on the rough floor, feel the dampness seeping into my heels, and let myself go in that sadness that smells of old clothes and unfulfilled promises. I tell myself it wasn't my fault. But the truth is that part of me always knew that what happens when you cross a border goes far beyond the territory. We cross a threshold, and sometimes there is no turning back. I look again at the diploma, blurred by tears I never thought I would shed again like this, alone, so far from everything. I close my eyes, and the sound of the train mixes with my memories. I slowly slip into the past, like when you fall asleep after many sleepless nights. I see myself as a child in that town in Jalisco where it all began. I hear the crickets again, smell the mole my mother used to make. And so, without meaning to, today's pain pushes me straight back to the beginning of my story. My whole life began in a small town called San Juan de los Lagos in the state of Jalisco. The streets were narrow, with dusty dirt that rose in golden clouds every time a cart or a rusty bicycle passed by. At midday, the sun stripped the facades of the houses bare, revealing their bright colors worn by time. The deep blue of the church, the intense red of Don Raul's butcher shop, the yellowish facade of Doña Lupe's store, which smelled of sweets and freshly baked cookies. The aroma of sweet bread wafted from the bakery, mingling with the smell of wet earth when the rain came, and the sound of roosters crowing in chorus at dawn. My parents, Juan and Maria, were the pillars of my world. My father, a burly man with hands rough from working in the agave fields, had dark, deep eyes that seemed to hide 1,000 secrets. Always dressed in his worn hat and plaid shirt, he had a strong but loving character. "Mijo," he would always say to me. "Honest work never killed anyone, and those who don't work don't eat." My mother, thin and with a warm smile, had a habit of singing while she cooked, her soft voice filling the house with hope. Her hands were always busy, whether preparing tortillas or weaving a blanket for someone in the village. As a child, I remember long days running along dirt roads, feeling the heat on my skin and the fresh scent of prickly pears and mesquite. My friends were children of all ages, and we played tirelessly until the sun began to set. We played Ring Around the Rosie under the tree in the plaza, and when the church bell rang at 6, we all ran home to eat what my mother had prepared: beans with chorizo, rice, and sometimes, on weekends, roast beef that filled the air with an irresistible aroma. The house where I grew up had 3 small rooms and a patio where my mother grew chili peppers and cilantro. The floor was made of packed earth that my father had worked until it was smooth as tile. In the mornings, the smell of coffee mixed with the smoke from the charcoal stove, and the singing of birds nesting on the tin roof. On Sundays, after Mass, the whole family would gather in the patio to eat pozole and listen to my grandfather's stories about the revolution. The first lessons of life were not always easy. I remember how, when I was 7, I fell ill with a high fever that would not go down. My mother, worried, would sit me on her lap and say in a trembling voice, "Don't worry, my son. I'll take care of you until you're better." But that night, with the ticking of the clock and the smell of medicine mingling with the cold in the room, I learned that fragility is part of being human, and that love is the most powerful antidote. I also remember the time Canelo, our old dog who had been my companion for as long as I could remember, died. I found him one morning, lying under the mesquite tree, motionless. My father explained that this was life, that everything that is born also dies, but that what matters is the love we give while we are here. I cried all afternoon, but that night, as my mother stroked my hair and sang me a lullaby, I understood that beautiful memories never die. At school, Miss Teresa was strict but fair. She always wore a scarf tied around her head and round glasses that made her look stern. She was the only one who encouraged me to dream beyond the borders of our town. And I remember her words: "With education, son, you can go anywhere you want, no matter where you come from." Those words were engraved in my mind, like an invisible tattoo on my soul. Adolescence brought its own difficulties and discoveries. Between school and my first responsibilities working at the local market, I began to discover who I really was. My first job was at Don Raoul's butcher shop. He was a fat, sweaty man who chewed tobacco and spat into a rusty tin can. His hands were always stained with blood and he smelled of rancid fat. But despite his roughness, he taught me the importance of discipline and respect. "Boy," he would say to me as he sharpened his knives, "this is where you learn to work. No complaining. If you want to eat, you have to work." I would arrive at 5 in the morning to help hang the meat, clean the tables, and serve the women who came to buy lunch. The smell of fresh blood and the buzzing of flies became part of my routine. But so did the pride of earning my first pesos. Then came my first taste of love with Isabel, a girl with big eyes and a shy smile, who lived 3 houses down from mine. She had long black hair, and when she laughed, dimples formed on her cheeks that drove me crazy. Our first kiss was under the porch of her house, awkward and sweet with the taste of tamarind she had been eating. Although time and distance separated us, she will always be part of those memories that I cherish in my heart. On weekends, we would go to the town dance, where the band played ranchera music, and we all danced in the dusty square. Isabel taught me how to dance, stepping on my feet and laughing at my stumbles. "Don't be silly, Rosalio," she would say. "Just follow my steps and let the music carry you." On those nights, under the colored lights hanging from the trees, everything seemed possible. Family life changed when I met Luisa at a fair in the neighboring town. She was a hard-working woman with soft but strong hands who knew how to sew and cook like few others. Her brown eyes always had a spark of joy, and when she smiled, she lit up any room. We fell in love slowly, the way people fall in love when they know it's serious. When I married Luisa, we dreamed of a future full of hope and honest work. On our wedding day, under the altar decorated with yellow and orange marigolds, with the cheerful music of the town band playing, we felt that anything was possible. She wore the white dress her mother had sewn, and I wore a suit I had bought with my savings from the butcher shop. On our first night together, amid nervous laughter and whispered promises, I knew I had found my partner for life. The first years of marriage were difficult, but happy. We lived in a room we rented in the house of Doña Carmen, a widow who charged us little in exchange for me fixing her roof and Luisa helping her with the housework. The room was small, barely big enough for our bed and an old wardrobe. But it was ours. At night, after working all day, we would lie down and plan our future, dreaming of the house we would own and the children we wanted to have. When Luisa became pregnant with our first child, I felt a joy mixed with terror that I had never experienced before. I was going to be a father, but I also knew that the responsibility would be enormous. During those 9 months, I worked double shifts at the butcher shop to save money for the delivery and the baby's expenses. Leonardo was born in the early hours of a December morning, when the cold penetrated to the bone. Luisa had been in pain all night, and I paced nervously down the hallway of the health center, smoking cigarette after cigarette until my throat hurt. When the midwife came out and said, "It's a boy, and he's healthy," I felt like the world was coming down on me with pure emotion. The first time I held Leonardo in my arms, so tiny and wrinkled, with his eyes closed and his little fists clenched, I knew my life had changed forever. "Son," I whispered, "I promise you'll have everything I didn't have. You're going to study. You're going to be someone important." At that moment, I didn't know that promise would cost me so much. The first few years with Leonardo were a mixture of exhaustion and absolute happiness. Seeing him grow, learning to walk by holding onto the furniture, saying his first words, was better than any party. Louisa and I took turns caring for him at night when he cried because of teething or colic. Although we were tired, we were happy. Then came the girls, Patricia and Carmen, 2 years apart. The house was filled with noise, laughter, crying, and toys scattered everywhere. Louisa managed to take care of all 3 while I worked longer and longer hours to support the family. But it wasn't all happiness. When Leonardo was 8, the economic crisis hit our town like a hurricane. Don Raul's butcher shop went out of business because people no longer had money to buy meat. Many businesses closed, and those that remained barely survived. I lost my job overnight. For months, I looked for work all over town and in neighboring towns. I took whatever jobs I could find, carrying bags at the market, helping with construction, selling corn on the street. But the money wasn't enough. The debts piled up, and at night, after the children fell asleep, Louisa and I would stay up in the kitchen doing the math, which never added up. "What are we going to do, Rosalio?" Louisa would ask me, with tears in her eyes. "The children need shoes for school, and we don't even have enough for tomorrow's food." Those words hurt me more than any blow. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to my children's breathing, promising myself that I would find a way to get them ahead. During long talks in the courtyard, under the starry sky, we talked about the American dream that seemed unattainable, but called to us with irresistible force. It was my compadre Roberto who first told me about going north. He had returned from the United States after 3 years, with enough money to buy a house and open a store. "Rosalio," he said one afternoon as we drank beer in his new yard, "you can make it there. It's hard, but you can do it. In 3 years, you can make what you can't make here in 20. The idea ran through my head day and night. Was it right to leave my family to go to an unknown country? What if something happened to me along the way? What if I couldn't find work? But when I saw my children eating beans every day because we couldn't afford anything else, when I saw Louisa mending clothes that couldn't be mended anymore, I knew I had to do something. There were nights of tears and doubts. What if I never come back? I asked Louisa one night. What if they deport me? What if the children grow up without their father? Louisa hugged me tight and said, "I'd rather you go than starve here. The kids will understand, and I'll wait for you as long as it takes." Finally, after months of thinking it over, we decided it was time to leave. It was the only way to give our children a future, especially Leonardo, who was very smart and deserved to go to college. Saying goodbye was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. My parents hugged me tightly. My mother cried and told me to take good care of myself and come back soon. Leonardo, who was already 9, asked me when I was coming back. "Soon, son," I lied. "In 2 years, 3 at the most." "Are you going to bring me presents?" he asked me, with those big eyes he had inherited from his mother. "I'll bring you everything you want," I promised, not knowing that that promise would haunt me for the rest of my life. Louisa and I shared one last breakfast at the old wooden table, whispering promises that we knew time would test. Then, with a small backpack and a heavy heart, I set off on my journey into the unknown, toward the border that separated me from my dream, and also from everything I loved. The months before I left were a roller coaster of emotions that tore my soul apart day after day. First, I had to find a reliable coyote, someone who had experience getting people across without getting caught by immigration. My friend Roberto recommended Don Esteban, a thin, sun-weathered man who had been in the business for over 15 years. "Look, Rosalio," Don Esteban said to me as he chewed on a toothpick in the town bar. "I'll take you, but it's 5,000 pesos. No haggling. And if they catch you, you don't know me." He had small, shrewd eyes, nicotine-stained hands, and a scar across his left cheek. He didn't inspire confidence, but he was my only option. 5,000 pesos was a fortune for us. I had to sell our only cow, a poor, skinny beast, but she gave us milk for the children. Luisa cried when they took her away, because that cow had been a wedding gift from her parents. We also sold the old radio we loved to listen to in the afternoons, the wardrobe I had made with my own hands, and even the gold earrings my mother had given Luisa when we got married. "It's only for a while," I would say to Luisa when I saw her looking at the empty space where the wardrobe had been. "When I come back, I'll buy you a better one, bigger, with mirrors." But I could see in her eyes that she knew, just like me, that things never go back to the way they were when you go so far away. I also had to borrow money from my brother Joaquin, who worked in Guadalajara. "Are you sure about this, brother?" he asked me when I explained my plan. "It's very dangerous. I knew a guy who left 2 years ago and we never heard from him again." "I have no other choice, Joaquin," I replied. "My children are going to starve to death here. At least there I have a chance." He lent me 1,500 pesos on the condition that I pay him back as soon as I started working in the United States. It was money he had saved to fix his house, but he sacrificed it for me. My brother's generosity filled me with a responsibility that weighed on me like a slab on my chest. The last week at home was sweet torture. Everything tasted different. Everything smelled more intense, as if my senses knew they had to record every detail for the years of absence that lay ahead. The morning coffee tasted more bitter. Luisa's tortillas were softer, and my children smelled sweeter when I hugged them before they left for school. I spent hours teaching Leonardo how to be the man of the house in my absence. "You're the oldest son?" I told him as we walked through town. "You have to take care of your mom and your sisters. You have to help with everything you can." "Yes, Dad," he would reply, with the seriousness of a child trying to grow up too fast. "But when are you really coming back?" "Soon," I lied again. "As soon as I save enough money for us to live better." I bought him a wooden spinning top at the market, one of those that spin with a string. "So you'll remember me," I said. I hugged him so tightly that he complained I was hurting him. But I didn't let go until he pulled away himself. It was harder with the girls, because they were younger and didn't understand why their dad was going so far away. Patricia, who was 6, asked me if I was going to send them letters. Carmen, who was 4, just kept repeating, "Don't go, Daddy, don't go," as she clung to my leg. "I'll write to you every week," I promised them, even though I knew I could barely write the basics. "And I'll send you pictures of all the beautiful places I see." Luisa cried all the time when she thought I wasn't looking. I would find her in the kitchen, drying her tears with her apron, or in her room, hugging my pillow. At night, we would hug each other tightly, as if we wanted to squeeze all the love we were going to miss during those years of separation into our embrace. The day I left, it was cloudy, with a cold wind that made the dry leaves dance in the yard. I got up before dawn and stood for a while watching my children sleep. Leonardo had a frown on his face, as if he were solving some problem in his dreams. Patricia was hugging her rag doll, and Carmen had her thumb in her mouth, something she no longer did when awake, but still did when asleep. I had breakfast in silence with Luisa. Huevos rancheros with green salsa, refried beans, and black coffee. But the food stuck in my throat because I knew it would be the last time in a long time that I would eat my wife's cooking. Luisa also ate slowly, as if she wanted that moment to last forever. "Did you take everything?" she asked me, even though we both knew I was only taking the bare essentials. 2 changes of clothes, the few pesos I had left after paying the coyote, a photo of my family, and the medal of the Virgin of Guadalupe that my mother had given me. "Yes," I replied. "And you? And do you have enough money for the month?" "Yes, and if not, I'll borrow some from my sister. Don't worry about us. Just worry about getting there safely." When it was time to wake the children to say goodbye, I felt like my heart was breaking. Leonardo got up immediately, as if he had been waiting for that moment. The girls took longer to understand what was happening. But when they realized that Dad was leaving, they started to cry. "Don't cry," I said, even though I felt like crying myself. "Daddy is going to work very hard to send you money so you can go to school and have everything you need." "Will you bring us toys?" Carmen asked, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her nightgown. "All the toys you want," I promised, picking her up for one last hug. She smelled like chamomile shampoo and cookies, that sweet smell that little kids have. Don Esteban arrived at 8 in the morning in an old, rusty pickup truck with a strange noise coming from the engine. "Ready?" he asked, without getting out of the vehicle. "Because there's no turning back now." I got in with my small backpack, and when the truck started and began to drive away from my house, I turned to see my family for the last time. Luisa was standing at the door with the girls, and Leonardo was running behind the truck shouting, "Goodbye, Dad," until he couldn't keep up. That image is etched in my mind like a photograph that never fades. My wife and daughters at the door of our humble home, and my son running down the dusty street, getting smaller and smaller until he disappeared. The trip to Tijuana took 2 days. There were 4 other people in the truck. A boy of barely 18 who looked nervous and scared, a middle-aged woman who was going to meet her husband, and an older man who had crossed several times but was always deported. "Things are getting harder and harder," the older man told me as we ate tortas at a stop. "Now there are more patrols, more sensors, more dogs. But if you're lucky and go with someone who knows the area, you can make it." During the trip, I thought a lot about my children, about whether I was doing the right thing. Was it worth risking everything for an uncertain future? But every time I had doubts, I remembered the hungry faces of my children and knew I had no other choice. In Tijuana, we stayed in a safe house that was actually hell. There were more than 20 of us crammed into 3 small rooms with no proper ventilation and only one bathroom, which was always dirty. The smell was unbearable, a mixture of unwashed bodies, stale food, and fear. Pure fear that you could smell in the sweat of everyone there, waiting for their turn to cross. The food was terrible. Watery beans, hard tortillas, and water that tasted like chlorine. But no one complained because we all knew we were there out of necessity, not by choice. Don Esteban visited us every other day to tell us that it wasn't time yet, that there was a lot of surveillance, that we had to wait. Meanwhile, I spent the few pesos I had left on calls home from a payphone. "How are they?" I would ask Luisa. "Fine, everyone's fine. The kids ask about you. Leonardo helps me a lot with his sisters. Tell them I love them very much and that I'll be sending them money soon. Be very careful, Rosalio. May God protect you." Those calls gave me the strength to keep going. But they also filled me with a nostalgia that hurt my chest like a stab. After a week in that horrible house, Don Esteban finally told us it was time to cross. "Tomorrow night," he informed us. "Get ready because it's going to be difficult. And remember, if they catch you, you never saw me." That last night before the crossing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about my family, praying to the Virgin of Guadalupe to protect me, and mentally preparing myself for what was to come. I knew that the next day, my life was going to change forever. For better or for worse. At dawn, I woke up with a mixture of terror and hope that I had never felt before. It was the day I was going to cross that invisible line that separates dreams from reality, poverty from opportunity, and my family from me. On the night of the crossing, the air was so cold that it penetrated to my bones, despite the borrowed jacket I was wearing. They took us out of the house shortly before midnight in silence, only the urgent whisper of Don Esteban. "Quick and quiet. Don't make any noise. Don't turn on any lights." There were 10 of us in the group. We walked one behind the other along the edge of a concrete wall. The ground covered with weeds that stuck to our pants and wet our shoes with the early morning dew. The smell of wet earth and other people's sweat filled the air. In the background, we could hear the distant sound of cars on the highway, and from time to time, a bark, a howl, the heavy breathing of one of us slipping on the gravel. My heart was beating so hard that I feared the guards could hear it. The faces of my children flashed through my mind, Luisa's voice, the fear of never seeing my family again. I was carrying a small bottle of water, hard cookies wrapped in newspaper, and my mother's rosary in my pocket. First, we crossed a fetid canal, the water freezing to our knees. move forward, murmured the old man behind me. When we emerged from the canal, shivering, Don Esteban led us to the foot of a hill. That's when I really felt the danger. In the distance, the Border Patrol's searchlights swept by like knives of light. We had to stay still, crouching among the rocks, waiting for them to pass. There was a moment, when one of the women stumbled and fell to her knees, that I thought it was all over, all. Those few seconds felt like hours, everyone holding their breath, listening only to the distant rumble of the engines. Finally, Don Esteban signaled to us, and we continued crawling, our pants dirty, our hands hurt from leaning on thorns. It went on like this for hours, walking, hiding, taking turns moving forward. When the fence finally became small behind us, and we felt the silence of the American desert, some cried, others just sat on the ground, exhausted. For me, the fear didn't end there. The fear got into my bones, and I knew that from now on, it would never completely leave me. They left us on the outskirts of a town, I couldn't say which one. The dawn was gray, the earth dry, the sky different. The air smelled strange, cleaner, but also colder. Don Esteban left us clear instructions. Take that road, 1 kilometer, and the white truck will pick you up. Don't talk or ask any questions. We waited crouched in the ditch until the rusty truck arrived. The driver didn't say a word. He just made us get in, covered with old blankets. The smell of the engine and sweat mixed with my own fear. We were huddled together, knee to knee, our eyes wide open, not daring to speak. 12 hours later, they dropped us off in front of a house on the outskirts of Phoenix. We were greeted by a fat woman with a harsh voice and who gave us white bread, a glass of hot milk, and assigned us a mat on the floor of a living room. I can still hear the clicking of her sandals on the tile floor, the TV blaring with a contest of incomprehensible shouting, the hum of an old fan. I slept, but my body remained alert. I woke up several times in the early morning, unsure if I was safe. The mattress smelled of urine and damp. Through the window, the sun was just rising when the house was already bustling with activity. People were coming and going, making quick phone calls, shouting instructions in English and Spanish. On the first day, I went out into the street, shivering from the cold and fear of the police. I walked to a small store where everything was expensive. The fruit glistened like wax, and the employees spoke quickly to each other. I bought some bread and cheap ham. It cost almost all my money. That afternoon, I tried to call home from a payphone. I dialed with cold fingers, and when I heard Luis's voice on the other end, my throat closed up. "Did you get there, Rosalio? Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine. We crossed last night. I'm tired, but fine. How are the kids?" "They're all asking for you. Leonardo says he wants to tell you about his homework. Will you be able to send money soon?" "I'll look for work tomorrow," I promised. "Don't worry, we'll make it." I hung up, crying silently, resting my forehead on the cold metal of the phone. I didn't want anyone to see me, but in those days we were all invisible, and no one looked at anyone else. The first night alone, I slept on a mattress with 5 other men. Their snoring, the smell of feet and cheap soap, the hum of the broken refrigerator. Everything was new, everything was foreign. I wrapped myself in my jacket, hugged my rosary, and prayed to God for the strength to endure the loneliness. Little by little, I got to know the others. Juan, from Veracruz, washed dishes in a restaurant. Eliseo, from Puebla, swept warehouses. Martin, from Oaxaca, painted houses. They all had similar stories. Families waiting, shared dreams, and fears they didn't admit to. Sometimes, when the lights went out, you could hear sobbing that no one mentioned the next day. I tried to learn a few words of English. How much? Work, money. Those 3 were essential. At the store, I repeated hello fearfully, afraid of mispronouncing it. I soon understood that language was a second border that I crossed every day, hoping not to get lost along the way. That's how the first few weeks went. From home to work, from work to home, eating bread and beans, going over in my mind the promise to return, the promise to send money, the promise that everything made sense. But that first morning, after crossing the border, with my feet still frozen from the walk and my pockets empty, I knew that the journey was just beginning. That my real battle was to keep my heart whole, my dignity, and the memory of who I was and who I was willing to give everything for. With the little money I had left after paying Don Esteban and the rent for the shared house, my first goal was to find work. It didn't matter what. In those days, you don't ask, you beg. Martin, my new acquaintance from Oaxaca, took me in his dusty truck to a Home Depot parking lot. There, dozens of men got up at 5 in the morning and waited. Standing, shivering with instant coffee in styrofoam cups, their eyes lost between the fog and the barely visible sun, for the arrival of old trucks driven by contractors looking for cheap labor. The first week, I received only rejections. "I need someone with papers. Zrenia, я не говорю по-испански." Swing, "I already have enough people." Sometimes just a wave of the hand, or not even that. And the truck would drive away, leaving behind the smell of gasoline and crushed hopes. On the 6th day, a man named Grady approached me, holding up 2 fingers. "You, come. Work today, 20 an hour. Carry wood, clean, fast." I barely understood. but I nodded gratefully. I got in with 4 others, my stomach tight with nerves and hunger. The first job was grueling. I spent 12 hours carrying planks, sweeping debris, mixing cement. My hands were bleeding after 2 hours. I didn't know the tools, and the foreman's English was incomprehensible. I only understood no good, and faster. When we finished, he paid me in crumpled bills. $150, my first American paycheck. I remember the smell of those bills. Dust, other people's sweat and promise. I sat down on the sidewalk and cried. Laughter and tears mixed together, repeating under my breath, I did it, at least today. That night, I bought bread, milk, tortillas, and tomatoes at a Mexican store. I made some beans with the others in the house. The smell of food restored some of my dignity, and as I chewed, I thought that in my village this would be nothing. But here, it was a feast. Soon, my life became a repetition of the same days. Getting up at dawn, half an hour on the bus to the corner of Home Depot, waiting for luck to strike, accepting any job. Some days there was nothing, and I would come home counting my coins, ashamed to call home. At first, I called Louisa every night. The first few times, we both cried. She told me about the village, how Leonardo missed the bedtime stories, how Patricia wanted me to help her with her homework, how the corn crop had failed. I lied to her. I told her I was fine, that I was eating enough, that I had friends. I needed her to have hope, even though I was losing mine. I started saving pennies, sending as much as I could through Western Union. $100 the first time, then $150, sometimes only $70 when there was less work. I kept the transfer receipt as if it were a diploma. Sleeping was the biggest challenge. 5 men shared a room, each with his own world. Some prayed, others listened to music quietly, others vented loudly, talking to themselves. The smell was a mixture of feet, sweat, soap, and stale hope. Every night, I would put the medal of the Virgin Mary on my hand, close my eyes, and try to remember the noise of my village, the smell of wet earth, the laughter of my children. As the months went by, I learned the unwritten rules of being an immigrant. I learned to say sorry and tomorrow, to buy time when I didn't understand. I learned which streets to avoid when CE was coming. I learned that at traffic lights, no one had time to look at your face, and that, paradoxically, it gave you freedom and sadness at the same time. Martine, my roommate, taught me how to use the bus and gave me advice on construction. Juan took me to buy stronger boots. Eliseo patiently translated job offers in the neighborhood bulletins for me. At night, we shared tortillas, stories, and sometimes silence. But I also experienced racism for the first time. A boss yelled, "Stupid Mexican," at me when I dropped a bucket of nails. Another gave me $20 less because you don't speak English. I wanted to fight, but the fear of losing everything weighed more heavily. I learned to endure, sometimes to laugh so I wouldn't cry. The hardest part was the cold. In winter, the air was biting. I only had a thin jacket and 2 sweaters that Louisa had knitted. I remembered my mother saying that the northern cold teaches you humility. Every night, curled up in bed, I was thankful for having a blanket, even if it was borrowed. I got up at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of Juan's alarm clock, an insistent beeping. I sat on the bed and stretched my feet, listening to the creaking wood, the murmur of my roommates' voices, the gurgling of the old coffee maker. The bathroom smelled of damp and cheap soap. I washed my face quickly, combed my hair with water, and ran out, grabbing a tortilla with beans wrapped in aluminum foil. On the bus, my body felt numb, pressed against the window as I looked at the streets lined with big houses and gardens with American flags, thinking that for me, that country was just a source of work. When I arrived at Home Depot, the air was always cold and smelled of diesel and sweet bread from a Salvadoran woman's cart selling coffee. I bought one when I could and sat among the others, all with faces full of weary hope, all with stories like mine. At 7 a.m., the contractors arrived. Men got on like they were picking watermelons. They looked you over, asked, "Strong?" And you nodded, even if your back was broken. The workday was a marathon, carrying, cleaning, learning in silence. At 6 p.m., back on the bus. At home, a quick shower, rice with eggs, and 1,000 memories. My soul was sustained by the routine. Sunday was special. I dressed up, went to Mass at a church where the priest was from Michoacán, and where we all cried at some point when we heard, "Amigo, eres mi hermano." When I got back, I called Luisa, asked about the children, and wrote down the small victories. I knew that if I wanted something more, I had to learn English. I signed up for night classes at the community center. The teacher, Mrs. Evans, smiled a lot and had the patience of a saint. She wrote words on the board and made us repeat them. Job, tools, money, please. I memorized what I could. At first, it was like learning to walk again. The younger kids learned faster, but I didn't give up, even though my head hurt from trying so hard. With time, I improved. I was able to ask for better jobs and negotiate wages. I went from cleaning up debris to installing floors, then painting, then even working as an electrician's assistant. I learned to navigate the system, to help other immigrants, to not give up so easily. One day I got a raise for being the most punctual. I took my first big paycheck to the ATM, smelled it, touched it as if it were gold. I called Luisa that night, crying again, and said, "Now, my daughter, we're getting closer to our dream." Life in the shared houses was a mixture of communion and loneliness. Everyone had their own schedules, their own music, their own secrets. Some cooked chicken soup and left the aroma in the air. Others preferred to eat out, returning with greasy fast food bags. Sundays were for cleaning, borrowed vacuum cleaners, windows open to get rid of the stale smell. Deep but fragile friendships formed among my housemates. Juan left after 6 months for Chicago in search of better pay. Eliseo fell ill and returned to Mexico. Martin stayed, and even today, 10 years later, he is like a brother to me. Sometimes new friends would come over, sharing songs and stories from towns that none of us knew. It was our way of feeling like we belonged in a place we never thought of as home. At first, Luisa and I talked every day. She told me about the children, school, and the town. She asked me for advice on disciplining Leonardo and curing Carmen's cough. But over time, the conversations became less frequent and shorter. The cost of the calls, fatigue, routine. Sometimes we argued about money, jealousy, or pure nostalgia. It hurt me that the children, especially Leonardo, wanted to talk to me less and less. Money transfers became the main language. I deposited money today. Buy whatever you need. I sent birthday greetings via text message. Photos arrived in the mail, less and less frequently. I missed all the big moments. A good grade, the first tooth, the school festival. I learned to celebrate alone, to mourn my absences in silence. Sometimes Leonardo spoke to me in a tone that hurt, as if I were a distant relative, not his father. "I'm fine, put Mom on." Or the worst phrase, It's just that all the other dads go to the games here. What could I say? How could I explain that I cleaned other people's bathrooms because I couldn't be there with him? The most painful moment was Patricia's birthday, when I called and heard the other children shouting, and then they hung up quickly. At that moment, I understood that even if I sent dollars and gifts, what was needed was my presence. Little by little, I noticed from the photos that Leonardo was growing up fast, that his eyes were hardening. Luisa told me that he was doing very well in school, that his teachers said he was very smart, that he might be able to get a scholarship. I daydreamed about seeing him graduate, thinking that all the suffering had been worth it. But I also felt jealous, afraid. What if I became a stranger to him? The girls grew up almost without remembering my smell, my voice. The distance was a slow knife. Sometimes, eating dinner alone, I would think, is it worth it? Will I really be able to go back someday and be a real father, not just a provider? Will my son respect me, love me, understand me? Over the years, I learned that migrants don't just cross a geographical border. Every day they cross an emotional divide. Between what you were and what you are. Between the past and the present, between pride and nostalgia. And hope never comes for free. The years in the United States pass in a strange way. The days drag on, monotonous and hard, but the years fly by, like pages torn from a calendar. My body began to take its toll. Back pain, calluses on my hands, burning eyes from all the dust and paint. A dry cough stuck in my chest, and my knees creaked with every step. Now, in my early 50s, I no longer had the strength I once had, neither physical nor emotional. The fear of getting sick without insurance haunted me every night. I began to feel a deep loneliness. Although I was surrounded by other migrants, most of them also kept their sadness well hidden. Sometimes, the rented house felt like a tomb. I no longer called Luisa on Sundays. She said she was tired, and the children were busy with their own things. I started smoking again, going out onto the porch, enveloped in the damp smell of drying clothes and the echo of distant car horns. The stress of the paperwork and immigration insecurity was mounting. There were more and more raids, threats, news of people being detained just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I slept little, fearing every shadow of a siren. I ate poorly. Many days, just sweet bread and watered-down coffee, a little packet soup. I realized how much I needed my children's hugs, a real conversation with Luisa. But the phone was a wall, and money was the only language we had left. I began to feel a bitter rage. Was this what I had worked so hard for? Was this what I had sacrificed everything for? The distance was no longer just geographical. Sometimes the pain made me want to leave everything behind and head south, even if it meant walking. I noticed it first in small details. One day, I called home and Leonardo answered curtly, barely saying, "What's up, Dad?" I asked him about school and he answered in monosyllables. "Everything's fine. I have to go." He didn't even ask for money or say hello to his sisters. He just hung up quickly. The following week, Louisa wrote to me saying that she thought he had changed, that he hardly spoke to her. He's busy with college stuff. I think he wants to do everything on his own. I felt proud, yes, but also a twinge of jealousy. He didn't need me anymore. The photos they sent showed Leonardo taller, more confident, with friends I didn't know, in places I didn't recognize. In one photo, I saw my son in his high school graduation gown, surrounded by young Americans, all smiling, with him in the center. I felt proud, but also an enormous sadness. It was his world. and I no longer had a place in it. And more, communication with Louisa was through short messages. Sometimes she would just send a list. School payments, electricity, notary, scholarship signing. I thanked her, of course, but she no longer asked me how I slept, what I ate, how I felt. I became a provider, not a husband. Martine, my friend, noticed. One night when we were having a couple of beers, he said to me, "You know what you need, Rosalio? To forgive yourself. You've done a lot. Sometimes you have to accept that you've lost things along the way and not everything can be recovered." I nodded, chewing on that bitter truth. Finally, the long-awaited news arrived. Leonardo had been accepted to Stanford. My chest burst with pride, and I shouted to everyone, "My son is going to the best university in the country." I sent more money than ever before. For his first laptop, to rent a small apartment near campus, for new books. The preparations filled months with excitement. Louisa traveled with him and called me in tears with emotion as she admired the campus. "We did it, Rosalio. We did it." Yes, I know. At work, I cried in secret, thinking of my own father, of his face when I finally sent him money for the first time. But during those years, I never traveled. I said it was because I didn't want to leave my job, because I was afraid of the paperwork. But deep down, it was terror of seeing a stranger in my son's eyes. We grew even more distant. Leonardo hardly ever called anymore. When he did, it was to say, "Dad, thanks for everything, but I'm busy." His graduation was announced months in advance. No one asked me to come. In fact, they seemed to avoid the subject, as if they assumed I couldn't or shouldn't. But this time, I wanted to show them that I was still his dad, that I still existed in that world of success. I saved up for months, got myself mentally prepared, and booked a bus ticket. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted it to be a surprise, an act of love, of a true father. That morning, I arrived exhausted, with dark circles under my eyes, sweaty hands, my best ironed shirt, and the medal of the Virgin Mary around my neck. The campus was picture perfect. Green gardens, old buildings, dozens of families hugging, laughter, camera flashes, background music. I saw Leonardo from afar, imposing in his black gown, surrounded by friends of all colors laughing and taking selfies. I approached, feeling my legs tremble. I shouted his name with a broken voice. "Leo!" 2, 3 times. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he was happy to see me. But then I noticed the discomfort, the way his face tensed, how he looked around the crowd to see who was watching us. A friend approached him and whispered something in his ear. He nervously shook his head. He didn't say hello. He didn't hug me. He just stepped aside, muttering under his breath, "I don't know him, sorry," and walked away, leaving me standing there alone with my diploma in my hand. My world came crashing down. All the sacrifice, all the sleepless nights, the impossible jobs, the loneliness, the pain. It all seemed meaningless. I sat down on a bench. The noise of the campus seemed distant, and shame overwhelmed me. I walked aimlessly around campus, watching parents and children hugging, taking pictures, and crying with joy. I cried alone, swallowing my anger and humiliation. I tried to call Louisa, but she didn't answer. I sent her a message. "Where are you?" "I came, but I can't find anyone." She didn't reply. I felt that even she agreed to keep me hidden. That night, in the motel room, I didn't sleep. The room smelled of cheap disinfectant and damp. Memories flooded back. Leonardo's birthdays, the days I sold my blood to pay the rent, the promised hugs. I wondered if it had all been worth it. If maybe I had been too stubborn, too proud, too blind. I thought about going back to the village empty-handed. I thought about leaving everything behind and getting out of there. But the exhaustion was greater than the despair. At dawn, I knew something had to change. Either I healed that wound or it would consume me forever. The weeks after Leonardo's graduation felt like a long, cold winter, even though it was the middle of summer. I returned to Milwaukee with a lighter backpack, but a heavier heart than ever. The room where I slept seemed smaller, the mattress harder, the silence deeper. The noise of the city was distant, as if the world had gone on without me. My routine remained the same. Work, grocery shopping, money transfers, brief calls to Louisa. But something had changed inside me. It was hard to get up, comb my hair, cook. I stopped calling Leonardo. I sent him a message once. "Congratulations, son. I'm proud of you." He replied with just 2 words. "Thanks, Dad." 2 words that weighed like bricks. I began to isolate myself, talking less with Martine and the other people in the neighborhood. Some noticed. "Are you all right, Rosalio?" Juan asked at the market, patting me affectionately on the shoulder. I replied, "Yes, everything's fine," but my face told a different story. At night, the memories hurt even more. I went over my life again and again. What did migration give me? Money? Absence? A successful but distant son? I felt anger, but also guilt. I thought, could I have done something different? Should I have stayed, endured the poverty? Would it have been better for them to be poor but together? Your mind doesn't let you rest, day or night. I talked to myself at length, in a low voice, when I thought no one was listening. I reproached myself. I defended myself. One day, after an exhausting day of cleaning basements, I sat down surrounded by the smell of bleach and damp and said to myself, what was the point of all this? Why did I come here? So my son could be ashamed of me. Then I would answer myself, no, I came because I loved him. I came because I wanted to break the cycle of poverty that was my destiny, to give him the freedom to choose. Yes, I gave my life, but I can't control how he lives it. Neither he nor I are to blame. But then the sadness would return. I would see the children of other migrants, some close, others fighting, and I would think, maybe distance always takes its toll. Maybe that's the price. Sometimes I would have fits of rage. Who is Leonardo to be ashamed of me? Doesn't he know everything I did? But that rage turned to tears, and the tears broke me down. I started writing down the questions that tortured me in an old notebook. What does it mean to be a father? Can you forgive yourself? What good is sacrifice if it separates more than it unites? The words flowed out, accompanied by memories of moments that would never return. Martine saw that I was upset and insisted, come with me to church. Talk to the priest, not to pray, but to pour out your heart. I went so as not to reject his help. There, Father Najera, also a migrant, listened to my story without judgment, just with attention. He said to me, many here think that sacrifice is pure. But sacrifice also hurts. It also leaves scars. Your son has the right to seek his own life. You have the right to love him just the same. A father's love is not measured in hugs, but in the seeds one sows and life decides how they grow. I cried when I heard those words. I felt some peace. I also spoke with Louisa, for the first time without asking for explanations. I asked her if she was happy, if it had been worth it. She replied that sometimes yes, sometimes no, that Leonardo needed to find his own way, and that perhaps, as an adult, he would understand, that I was not alone. I started going to migrant groups every Sunday. I shared my story between tears and laughter. I learned that I wasn't the only broken father, nor the only child who belonged to someone else. Some children come back, others never do. With each relationship comes a world. With each sacrifice, a different wound. Almost a year passed in this process. One day, looking out the window at the dark sky, I felt that I couldn't go on like this. Either I would sink completely, or I would learn to live with my story. I consulted with Martine and some colleagues. Some told me I should look for Leonardo, invite him for coffee, and talk things through, even if it hurt. Others told me to let it go, that sometimes life creates distance, and one must accept loneliness as part of it. It took me weeks to decide. Finally, I understood that I couldn't control other people's hearts, only my own. That the dignity of my efforts didn't depend on my son's reaction, but on my own ability to recognize myself and begin to heal. I promised myself that I would continue to help my family, but now without expecting anything in return. That the next time I saw Leonardo, I would hug him even if he hesitated. That life goes on, with wounds and beauty, and that my story could help others. I started taking small steps, going out more often, helping newly arrived countrymen find work, writing my story on loose sheets of paper, cooking something delicious on Sundays. I called my daughters and spoke to Louisa with less fear and more tenderness. I decided to save money to visit my town and my family without fear of what people would say. If Leonardo never looks for me, I will wish him well. If one day he does, I will be here. The most valuable thing was learning to forgive myself, knowing that guilt can hurt, but it can't rule your life. Migration gave me and took away, but I am still me, with all my flaws and my love intact. It took months of slow rebuilding. Little by little, I climbed out of the hole. I started a more stable job at a landscaping company where the boss, a Mexican-American named Ramiro, understood where I came from and tried to treat me with respect. It wasn't the life I had dreamed of, but I began to feel a little pride in belonging again. I decided to save money, and for the first time in almost 2 decades, I asked for time off work to travel to Mexico. I wanted to see my elderly parents, the last relatives I had left in the village, and also to close a chapter of my childhood. Returning to the village was like traveling back in time. The narrow streets, the shopkeepers shouting out their wares, the smell of tamales and boiling coffee in the plaza. My mother hugged me tightly, without asking any questions. My father, now hunched over, looked into my eyes as if searching for answers that never came in long-distance phone calls. We went over old stories, and I cried as I ate my first bowl of pozole. I talked about my daughters, about Louisa, about Leonardo, without hiding the wounds. I told them that sometimes life doesn't turn out the way you expect, but there are still moments of beauty and light. They simply responded wisely. Yes, son, the important thing is not to tire of loving. When I returned to the United States, I felt lighter, less haunted by ghosts. I decided to send Leonardo a long email, without reproaches or demands. I just told him about my trip, how proud I was, even though the pain was great. And I reminded him of one thing. You will always be my son, whether you recognize me or not. I'll be here. He didn't reply right away, but weeks later, a short, honest response arrived. Dad, I needed time. I never stopped loving my family, but sometimes it's hard to reconcile the two worlds. Thank you for understanding. It was just a few words, but I felt less invisible. Relationships with my daughters also improved. Patricia looked for work at a hospital. Carmen started studying nursing. Luisa, over time, accepted my distance without resentment. We talked like two old friends, without reproaches, celebrating the good times and the little that remained to share. I volunteered at the church, helping other newly arrived migrants. I listened to the stories of fatherless children, women struggling alone, young people who couldn't read. And for the first time, I felt that I could help from my own experience. Nothing I had been through was useless. Every wound spoke for itself. The biggest challenge was accepting myself. As an absent but loving father, as an anonymous but honest worker, as a foreigner and, at the same time, a man with deep roots. I learned to celebrate small achievements, seeing a money transfer arrive on time, receiving a call from my daughters, cooking mole for Martin and his new family on a sunny Sunday. The sincere hugs of friends weathered by life were worth more than any medal. Although my relationship with Leonardo never returned to what it had been during his childhood, new bridges were built. Several Christmases later, I found the courage to write to him. Would you like me to come visit you, unannounced, just for coffee? No strings attached. He finally replied, Sure, Dad. See you next month. It was only a first step. A hug, a photo, a long conversation were still pending. I knew that our story would continue to change, that sometimes time does not erase the pain, but it does teach us to see things in a different light. There was a night in Milwaukee, in the middle of winter, as the first snow fell, that I finally understood the essential. It wasn't necessary for my son to call me Dad in public or to show him my hands, worn out from working so hard. The love of migrant parents is quiet. It's written in letters, in remittances, in candles lit in secret. In the faith of a better tomorrow. Sitting alone, with a steaming cup of coffee and the radio playing distant cumbia music, I whispered to myself, I forgive myself. I did the best I could. Not everything heals. Not all children return. But I learned that I am not alone, that thousands of fathers and mothers carry these wounds. We are not strangers. We are the invisible roots that sustain the visible. Today, looking back, I understand that migration is a border that crosses not only countries, but hearts. That sacrifice will never be perfect, but it is deeply human. That being far away does not erase you, even if it makes you feel invisible. That growing up hurts, but it also allows us to leave a mark for others. Here are my lessons for anyone who will listen. Don't be afraid to love unconditionally. Your efforts will not be in vain, even if you don't always receive hugs. Seek help. No one should bear the burden of silence alone. Community is medicine. Forgive yourself. Do it every day, because you did the best you could. Tell your story. Tell it to other migrants, to your children, to the world. They may need it more than you think. If you are a migrant, if you were ever the child who didn't say hello or the parent who couldn't hug, I want to tell you, you are not less. Hard paths also build beauty. I invite you to tell your own story below, to share, to listen to us. Because we are family, in nostalgia, in struggle, in hope. If you felt every tear, every fear and pride with me, thank you. Subscribe, join this community. Together, even though we are far away, we also make a home. And remember, wherever your heart is, there is also a home. And there, even if you can't see it, there will always be someone who recognizes you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, brother, sister, companion in the distance.